So the Improvement Foundation, and I think you've probably heard of PDSA cycles, because I think sometimes the local government authority uses a thing called plan, do, study. So plan, do, check and act. They change it slightly. Yeah, but we sort of stick with the plan, do, study, act, which is the quality improvement tool. Okay, we just carried out an activity just then around measurement. So if we were to think of the 3 fundamental questions, could anyone just shout out what they thought the aim was? So you were looking at the longest spin, okay? And what do you think what measure did you actually use? The time for the spin to occur. And then the change ideas.
Different techniques to spin.
Correct. So that's just a very quick example of how we've captured the 3 fundamental questions. So when you're thinking about the model for improvement in the context of your practice and the context of quality improvement and looking at the measures that you have to report against, it's very important to think about the first 3 fundamental questions. You need to understand what you're trying to achieve first, and that is your goal statement. And your goal statement is usually written as a SMART goal. Has anyone heard of the term SMART goal? Yes? Someone said yes. Could you give me an indication of what those acronyms would stand for? Specific? Measurable? Attainable? Relevant? And time-bound. Excellent, thank you. So we really stress on this, because if you write your goal statement accurately, then your team understands what you're working towards. Because remember, this is a team approach in your practice. So your first fundamental question is, say for instance, you want to focus on COPD in your practice. And we'll actually walk through an example. You want to write a goal statement, but with model for improvements, you have to make sure they are short, concise, achievable. So instead of writing a goal statement that states that by June 2020, we would have a really good, accurate representation of COPD patients in our practice, you really want to bring that down to a time-bound, specific test cycle that you can then take out and test using the PDSA cycles. Your measure is very important, so Collins walked you through a significant amount of detail around process, outcome, balance, output. These are all measures that we consider when we're looking at the broader statement around what we're trying to achieve. But in the essence of the PDSA cycles, which were those little tests, you did about 10 tests, you only just measured a small aspect. So once again, it's thinking about exactly what do you want to test, and how do you want to see those improvements, and how do you want to capture that you can share with your team. And the third fundamental question is those change ideas. And this is the fun bit where you can actually get your team to think about, well, what are some of the innovative things we could run as tests? What can we do on the ground that's actually going to lead up to answering that first question? Once you've actually penned this down, and you've got a good understanding of what your 3 fundamental questions are, you then take those change ideas and you run your PDSA cycle. Because your PDSA is a quality improvement tool to test any intervention you want to implement before you embed it into the way that you work on the ground. Does that kind of make sense? No? Did someone say no? Maybe yes, I didn't quite hear. So just to make sure you understand what the MFI is, 3 fundamental questions, PDSA cycle. PDSA cycles can run multiple times because you've got different ideas you want to test, but the most important part is answering doing the thinking bit. So let's take an example, a COPD management example. This is an example of a practice, the Hamley Road surgery. That's the composition of the team in that surgery. You've got about 6,200 patients, very busy practice, living in a suburban area. And this is the problem they identified. So in this instance, the practice has actually gone into their database and had a look at what do we actually need to improve. And they understand from their data that there's a low percentage of COPD patients with a GPMP claimed in the last 24 months. Patients may not be receiving optimal care and a loss of potential revenue. So So that's the problem they've identified in the practice. So we then take this and say, okay, well, as a team, what do we want to do here? We'll have to write a goal to understand what we're trying to achieve. In this particular instance, the problem is identified two areas. One is a clinical area, which is looking at optimal care, and the second is bringing the right revenue in. So this is the thinking bit, and let's answer the first question, as in the goal. We talked about the goal. We need to make sure we choose to write the goal accurately, and it actually captures the SMART acronym. It needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. The team needs to agree on this goal. So everyone's seated around the table and we've identified that as a problem. People need to understand what the problem is first. They all need to read it the same way someone else is reading it. And once they've understood what the problem is, they need to start looking at, okay, well, what do we really want to achieve out of this? What's achievable? What can we measure? And then you go about writing your goal. And you might decide at that point, well, which direction do we want to pick? And in that problem, you actually had two specific areas you might want to look at. So you could literally say, let's look at the optimal care composition of that goal, or let's just focus on the revenue. Really want to sort of look at our GPMP claims that we've got in our practice. So in this instance, this particular practice decided to write this goal down. 50% of COPD patients have had a GPMP claimed within the previous 18 months by October 2019. So do you think that's a SMART goal? Do you believe it's captured? Yes? I think it has. It's written in a way that's it's measurable. You know you want to look at 50% of the COPD patients who've got a GPMP claimed, and you've got a short time frame. Do you think that time frame is achievable by October? So what are we in August, September, October? That's a 3-month period. You could shorten that a little bit further. You could then even take that away and say, well, actually, what does GPMP claimed mean in our practice? What are those bits that we have to sort of accomplish to ensure a claim is actually, possible, to build the standards around it, so everyone understands what that means. And you could actually build a goal statement around that, so the clinicians feel that, okay, we're making sure that everyone across the practice understands what we're doing. So that's an example of what a SMART goal looks like. Just want to, okay. We then need to say, okay, well, if we're going to look at that as a goal, what's our baseline? So as a team, we're in August. Let's put a marker here and say we're going to have a look at our database and see how many GPMPs have actually been claimed. And that's our baseline as of now. You then have to decide, well, what do you think we should actually measure that will help us understand we're progressing down this path of meeting 50% of our COPD patients with the GPMP claim in the last 18 months? Will we look at a process, an outcome, or an output measure? And these are the measures they actually came up with. So the number of patients with recorded in the clinical software with a COPD code, which is your register. So I guess what they want to do here is make sure that they actually got the coding right first. They want to make sure that they've actually got a good representation of the patients who have a diagnosis of COPD. And then they want to look at the number of COPD patients with the register who have had a GPMP claimed in the previous 18 months. So that's your kind of your measure that's going to give you that answer, as in, okay, what percentage of the people who have been diagnosed actually have a GPMP? And if your register is saying you've got 180 patients, and you know that there's only 60 patients with a GPMP claimed, you'll say, okay, well, I want to improve that over the next 3 months. I want to see more of that being done. What does that actually look like? And can I measure that? Is it achievable? Can I get the patients back in? Can I do the recall or the review process in place? So those are the kind of conversations you might have with your team to determine if it's something that you can actually measure. And I believe, and Colin, correct me if I'm wrong here, this actually adds up to one measure, doesn't it, really, in essence, for this particular example?
Yeah.
And that's your outcome measure. No, your process measure. Would people agree? Because while you're actually looking at your number, which is your outcome, you're actually measuring your process. How are you actually going about getting your GPMP claimed? How are you actually checking your database and your register? What's in your system? So there's a number of steps that are involved in that. And then there comes those ideas, which is your third question, around what change ideas would I put into place that would lead to an improvement. Do you want to say something?
Another way of doing this, and it was pointed out the other week, is, for example, we're looking here at COPD patients who have had a GPMP claim within the previous 18 months. Now that 18 month, that's arbitrary. I mean, you could pick any time frame. But another way of looking at it is that the number of COPD patients who have had a GPMP review claimed in the last 6 months. So you could add something else in and say, well, okay, it's not only the GPMPs, we want to see the reviews being right up, and you might make it 8 months. It's up to you how you do it. But somebody said, well, the review might be actually a better indicator of whether somebody's coming back and getting it done. Because I don't know how many people are using GPMP reviews for their patients.
Do you not have to have a target set for the quarter?
No. No. You could do this on a monthly basis.
But for the payment, don't you have to have a quarterly target
No. They haven't been
as
any...
well as a future target, or not maybe a future
No,
target?
you don't have to have a target at all.
You don't have
Or
any
not a
target.
not a target, just a quarterly goal. Yeah, a quarterly, the plan has to be for that quarter.
No.
No, you have to have an activity in the quarter, right? And the activity could be one model for improvement, right? And within that, you might have measurement within that, and you'd have what you're trying to achieve with the model for improvement. That would classify as an activity, right? Mm.
I see what you're saying. So you're referring very much to the requirements of the PIP claim, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that within a quarter, should we not have a bit of a goal that's set and achieve that goal? So you can do that if it's something you want to do at a practice level, but it's not a requirement for you to get your PIP. So for instance, in this case, as an overall goal, you might say you want to improve the care of COPD patients in your practice. But your PDSA and your model for improvement test cycle, within that quarter, could be looking at the number of, not revenue, renewals, is that right? Reviews claimed. And you might shorten that. Now that gives birth to perhaps 6 or 7 PDSA cycles. All you're doing is you're demonstrating to the PHN that there's some level of continuous quality improvement activity happening in your practice. That you're starting to think about the data, that you're starting to embed change, and you're moving towards improvement. That's what you need to sort of demonstrate. So it could mean that to the team, the PCIOs, you could send out, and I'm thinking there's a plan, a template. You could write your plan down and say, well, this is what we're working towards. And this is where you might want to even demonstrate how far you've gotten. But you might do that through another avenue, and that's through the communities of practice. Because you might want to have a conversation with some of the other colleagues in the room to say, who else is working on COPD? What other change ideas are you guys implementing in your practice that perhaps I could sort of look at doing in my practice? But it isn't a technical requirement at this point in time for you to sort of set yourself a target and work towards it to demonstrate to the department or to the PHN. This is really something about improvement in your practice, that you as a team decide, well, this is something that's important to us. There's a real problem here, and I want to fix it, and go ahead and do it. So the department's not coming down on that. Sorry, go ahead.
Is a little bit different to historically when we've always, but for the most part, you're looking to reach
Correct.
percentages or numbers or
Yeah.
whatever. So it's just a different, I guess it's a bit of a different way of thinking to those who
Yeah.
have always been that focus.
And it is good to have that target. You might want to set yourself a target. So as a practice, you might decide this is our target, this is what we're going to work towards, and that's good. Because that helps sort of motivate people and gear them towards thinking down a certain path. But I think for this present moment and for the quarter, for the next 12 months, there isn't a requirement to demonstrate that one level above how you work. As long as you're able to capture some activity that's occurring, and that's why, which is really good in that sense, because it really opens up the door for you to work in any area you want to. You know, you don't have to stick to a certain target, you don't have to stick to a certain disease topic. You can pick what's relevant for your population base, for your practice, the dynamics of your practice, the complexities of the people you're working with, because all of that matters when you actually start to look at CQI being embedded in your practice. A lot of practices, when we sort of embarked on this, while we had principal GPs who owned the practice, and we had practice managers who were in the room, and we talked to them about PDSA cycles, when they went back, it was forgotten. Because you get lost. There's so much work happening and so dynamic in your space that they don't have protected time to think about, okay, what are we doing with this? How are we moving people forward? So that leadership level is important, that level of sustainability is important. So keeping something that's interesting and can motivate your team and actually allows you to demonstrate to your team first that if we make these changes and we embed these changes, we're actually going to end up with some really good numbers that we feel proud about. And then it'll eventually, down the track, and not sure when, if the department starts to say, okay, we'd like to start to put some targets in, you've already got a system in place. You've got a way to demonstrate that. You've got your team together, and you know what you have to do. But to answer your question, right now, there hasn't been that mandate that's come down from the department.
It's just the agreement that you're working on this for that quarter.
Yeah,
Because
so
that's what we signed with the
with the PHN, yes. But you're not held to, you know, you're still going to receive your PIP, irrespective of whether you complete that PDSA cycle or not. It's encouraged. It's more people are being told to please get on board fairly quickly, so you embed that change. But you're not going to be held ransom to that. No, if you don't have this, you're not going to get money. That sort of thing. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Correct. Yet, and we use the word yet because, you know, as we know, things change. But it's really just trying to get you into that thinking mode and embedding that change in place. So if I could just draw now, this lunch is being served, and what we might do is break for lunch, but we do want to when we come back, we do want to actually get each table to write out a goal, which is the first fundamental question. What am I trying to achieve? And we do want you to actually think of measures that will help you achieve that goal. Now, it could be on anything, in any topic area, and I believe that there was some pre-work that most of you actually did and identified areas that are of interest to you. It could be diabetes, or I'm not too sure what some of the others were. But you could actually pick a topic of your own on your table and decide, well, how do we actually write our goal? You'd be surprised sometimes, but even though we've walked through it, when you start to pen it down, you end up with a very big goal, and you should sort of bring it back down. So we'll give it a bit of a test.